and gentlemen, and welcome to the inaugural edition of Future Talks by MVM. I am George Tilesh, your host. I am the president of Phi Institute for Augmented Intelligence and the co-author of the book Between Brains, Taking Back Our AI Future. My mission is to steer AI to serve the public interest. We live in a world of uncertainty, disinformation, and distrust. The digitalization of our age became almost complete with the coming of the pandemic. The present and the future is increasingly defined by artificial intelligence, a rising force. The deep penetration of these technologies define an AI-driven future. But it is not your future, not our future yet. Our age is about deciding about the AI future, whose image AI will take, and that will need the full understanding of its nature. I'm telling you all this because this is all personal to me. So when I got the request to drive a talk show for citizens in the globe that makes sense of AI, I said yes. And I knew that you have many feelings about what AI is and what the AI can bring to your lives. You may be curious, you may be concerned, but we wanted to dig deeper in the framework of this show. Now that AI is mainstream in the media, you may have ideas about killer robots, Skynets, your job being in peril. But we wanted to give you the facts, actually scientific facts. We thought that our job was to balance it out. So we wanted to dig deeper, as I told you. What do citizens think about intelligence, machines, and AI? What images does this term bring? Let us now listen to a short video of what young people think about these terms.
Mit jelent az intelligencia?
Az embernek a megoldó képessége, mennyire tud megoldani egy bizonyos feladatot.
Ez egy velünk született képesség.
Hogyan ítélkezünk egy adott helyzetben, milyen döntéseket hozunk és miket veszünk figyelembe.
Dolgokhoz, az élethez, az emberekhez való hozzáállás.
Helyzet megoldó képesség, probléma megoldó képesség.
Tanulás, kreativitás, önzetlenség, minden, ami az emberi tulajdonságok összessége.
Információ használat, felfogás.
Minél gyorsabban, minél hatékonyabban tudunk alkalmazkodni.
Mi a különbség az emberi és a mesterséges intelligencia között?
A mesterséges intelligenciát ember hozta létre a saját intelligenciáját használva, és annak a mienségét vagy a jóságát inkább a program struktúráltsága határozza meg.
A legnagyobb különbség az ösztön.
Sok esetben a mesterséges intelligenciát nem biztos, hogy kézben tudják tartani.
A mesterségest azt lehet manipulálni.
A mesterséges intelligencia jelenleg még nem tart sehol a rendes intelligenciához képest.
Kell valaki, aki létrehozza a mesterséges intelligenciát.
Isten szülötte maga az emberi intelligencia.
Hogy néz ki a mesterséges intelligencia?
Megfoghatatlan, láthatatlan, mégis mindenhol jelen van.
Ilyen kis szilícium lapka, ami processzor és fut rajta rengeteg függvény.
Másodszorban az algoritmusok jutnak eszembe.
Hát, ha a skifit nézzük, akkor bárhogy úgy, mint akár mi is.
Wasn't this enlightening? Now we have something to work with. So we dreamed up Future Talks, what it will be about. We wanted to demonstrate the now and the future of AI and inspire you citizens to claim your AI future. And we want it to be scientifically accurate, demonstrate diversity of thought. We want it to be clear and approachable and demonstrate the AI impact on your lives. And of course, we want it to go in depth beyond the buzzwords to inspire you. However, even if I'm very passionate about this topic, I'm not confident enough to do this all alone. So to accomplish all that, we need a team of the finest minds in shining armor who share this sense-making mission. We need an A team, and that's a tough cookie. So I started wondering, first we need a teacher of cosmic proportions. So why don't we aim high for the #1 science communicator on Earth? Let us not be shy. Can we try for Neil deGrasse Tyson? Hi, Neil! Directly from space. Great to see you again.
Then, if I'm living in space, then I'm not the #1 science communicator on Earth.
That's definitely true. So how was your first and hopefully last pandemic Thanksgiving in New York?
Yeah, you know, I remembered reading about the 1918 pandemic, thinking they're doing the best they can, but that'll never happen again. Of course, the death rate is less than that pandemic, but I had so much higher hopes for how we would have handled this as a species that I'm just disappointed in the world for, you know, here's the equivalent of an alien invader who doesn't care your skin color, what side of a line in the sand you were raised on, or who you have sex with, right? All these things that divide us in modern times, the virus doesn't care. And this would have been the occasion to band together and react as a coherently functioning species, and we didn't. So, but otherwise, yes, my Thanksgiving in the United States, I had turkey, as we do, and it went very well, and my family thankfully remains COVID-free.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's good news in these tough times. So just for the audience, and to channel a very subpar version of David Letterman, my first guest needs no introduction. Neil deGrasse Tyson, globally known astrophysicist, author, science communicator, director of the Hayden Planetarium in New York, and television host of National Geographic. Neil is followed by millions, and he was on countless shows, TV shows. Many of my friends think about him as the Saint Peter of the gatekeeper of geek heaven. So if you don't mind me saying that. So Neil is a very, very strong team member, a superstar team member to start with. But then I started wondering that we need one of the great fathers and pioneers of AI research from Silicon Valley, whose books are the primary source to bring about human-compatible AI. I got someone in mind, actually my favorite AI author. Can we ask Stuart Russell? Hello, Stuart.
Hi, good morning from California.
Good morning. How is the weather in Berkeley, and how is Cyber Monday treating you today?
It's the weather is beautiful. We've had 10 straight days of gorgeous sunshine, and we had Thanksgiving at the beach. So, and we're very lucky. No influence of COVID so far on my family, and we're just keeping our fingers crossed for the next few months.
Wonderful. We are freezing over here in Budapest. Stuart, just for an introduction, you're a professor of computer science at UC Berkeley. You're a neurosurgeon at the same time at UCSF. You're an expert on robotics and bioinformatics, a pioneer in research and understanding of the long-term future and relationship of artificial intelligence with humans. As I mentioned, you're my favorite AI author with your book, Human Compatible.
Very kind.
No, that's very true at the same time. And you're also the co-author of the textbook, Artificial Intelligence, The Modern Approach, which is translated into dozens of languages, I think, and used by more than 1,000 universities in most countries of the world. Thank you for having you on the team.
It's a pleasure.
And then, talking about intelligence, we need a highly prized brain who spent his illustrious life studying the brain. And of course, I'm partial. If he can be Hungarian, all the better. So let us call Professor György Buzsáky. Professor Gyuri, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Perfect. Hello. How are you in New York?
Oh, fantastic. It's raining cats and dogs. It's not a good day today. But it's always good here.
Absolutely, I can definitely concur. So, Gyuri, we don't only share a first name, a birth town, and 2 continents and citizenship, but also an interest in neural networks of those many kinds. You obviously lead me in that regard. What are you working on these days, just in a nutshell?
I've been working always on the same problem, which is how information is transmitted and stored, interpreted in the brain. In big words, you can say this is memory. I'm particularly interested in how sleep affects our memory and our mental life.
That's wonderful, and we need more of that for sure. So just for a short introduction, Professor Buzsáky is the Biggs Professor of Neuroscience at NYU School of Medicine. He's the winner of the Brain Prize, which is the Nobel Prize of brain researchers for exploring the brain neural networks that play a key role in the memory process, as he just told you. He's Hungarian-American and member of the Hungarian and American Academy of Sciences. And our team now is almost complete, but we are still missing a key viewpoint, that of applied AI in business. Also, I feel a little bit alone in this studio here in Budapest. So the best authority I know on that is László Kishonti. And if he could auto-magically appear in the studio, that would make me very, very happy. Lotzi, what a pleasant surprise to have you here. How are you?
Fine. Hi, Judy. Thanks for the invite.
Lovely. I'm not solitary anymore. That's a great achievement. Lotzi, just for introductions, you're the founding CEO of AI Motive, and you have teams in Silicon Valley, Budapest, and Yokohama, Japan. It's a self-driving vehicle company, and you're striving for level 5 autonomy, full self-driving, and the innovation of your company, as I hear, is the vision-first approach you have. So talking about vision-first, what is your vision for applied AI in the industry?
We use vision-first approach because we think that it's easier to adapt the vehicles than adapt the environment to the vehicles.
That's for sure. That's certain for sure. Perfect. So our team is now complete. But now before we dive in, a few housekeeping rules. You have approached our studio or our channel through a website. There is an embedded Slido on the website. So please send in your questions. We want this to be a very, very interactive show. There is also simultaneous interpretation, Hungarian and English, so please choose the language of your preference. Don't be shy. We will try to be as approachable as possible, but please use the language that you're most comfortable with. And further on housekeeping, we will have 90 minutes of conversation, 30 minutes of Q&A. You can start sending in your questions now, and we will address them in the end, in the last 30 minutes. And if you have any small children at home with you, please make them watch the electric sheep in the background behind us, so they will probably fall asleep if they keep staring at the electric sheep. So here's our game plan for today. Probably you're interested in what we wanted to cover. First, we will start with AI definitions, and then we talk about the moment in time in the evolution of AI. Then we switch to like what it brings to our life right now, so applied AI in all fields of life, and what can AI do for us now. Then we take a walk on the dark side, talking the threats and challenges and the ethics of AI and how to overcome these challenges. And then getting a little bit more futuristic, we will be talking about intelligence explosion and how can we humans cope and maintain control. And then we close with an envisioning exercise on AI and how to optimize our human future in an AI world. So, why don't we dive in? So our first topic is making sense of AI. And just in a few seconds, our sense-making mission here is that, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are living in a low-trust environment, and the whole topic of AI is surrounded by hype, hysteria, hyperbole. So definitions are very important, especially now that we are in Europe. We are crazy about definitions. On one hand, so many people equate AI with the digital or the algorithmic in general without actually knowing what it means. Others only prefer to talk about AI in the future sense, about artificial general intelligence or the superintelligence context. I think our mission is to make sense of that and rebalance these kinds of definitions. Why is it personal for me? Actually, one of the questions that I keep asking for myself and from people who like to talk to me is, why is it different this time? For many, many years in my own research, I met countless opinions coming mostly from the world of politics and bureaucracy that it is just another wave. AI is just another wave. It will pass. It's like big data or cloud technologies before. But I think that this is something, our age is about something fundamentally different now. So let's talk about the foundations, just to have a common definition of artificial intelligence. Stuart, can I start with you, please? Can you please share your preferred AI definition? And also, one of the things that that is kind of like a pet peeve of mine is like, can we delineate the pragmatic and the aspirational definitions of artificial intelligence?
So it was very interesting listening to people, ordinary people on the street discussing their view of what intelligence is and the relationship between human and machine intelligence. And I would say mostly they got it exactly right. And intelligence is really about what you do, right? Are you doing the right thing? Do your actions make sense? Do they achieve your objectives or do they fail? People were talking about solving problems. It's the same basic point. Do your actions make sense? Do they end up changing the world in ways that make you happy? And this notion of intelligence gradually developed actually from the ancient Greek times through to the present. And we can write down definitions of this in mathematics. And that same definition was then applied to AI. So we try to create machines that achieve their objectives. Now that principle, we can apply it to any objective in any world, in any kind of physical body. It's the same basic principle. And the real difference between human and machine intelligence is that humans can cope with a vast range of tasks. I mean, pretty much anything you can think of in any circumstance, we can adapt very quickly to new tasks and new circumstances. And right now, machine intelligence doesn't have that capability. So we can build sort of human-level AI for very, very narrow tasks, like playing chess or Go, driving a car around a track, but actually driving it in the real world is still too difficult. Or we can try to make general-purpose AI, but it's really, really stupid. So we have that gap right there. I would say that it's quite difficult to draw a line between ordinary algorithms and artificial intelligence. There isn't really a hard and fast dividing line. Some people say, well, if it doesn't learn, then it's not AI, but that's not really true because, Deep Blue, which was the chess program that beat Kasparov, the human world champion chess player, it didn't learn. It just did reasoning and decision making. And early on, the first few decades of AI, that was the focus: reasoning, decision making, knowledge, planning, and we made a lot of progress with those. So we have planning systems that plan out the operations of the space shuttle, or airlines, or train systems. We have college-level mathematics problem solvers. We have systems you can ask questions about taxes or insurance or other really exciting things like that. And then just the last decade or so, we've seen real progress in perception and learning. That's very exciting because it starts to allow you to put the intelligence out there into the real physical world. So Laszlo's working on self-driving cars. That's something we'll see, I think, in this decade with a combination of the planning, decision-making, and the perception and learning put together to give you a capable system. I think another big area of progress in this decade will be language. Right now, AI systems don't really understand what they read in a meaningful sense, but I think that's changing. And once they can read, then they can do something which human beings can't do, which is that they can read everything the human race has written, and they can do it before lunch. So that's going to have a big impact on the world.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Why don't we do a little round robin for definitions? So I would like to ask Neil about his definition of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, just a quick note. Your AI bot that will read everything humans have ever written, that is only possible if everything humans have ever written is online. They will not have any knowledge of a book that has not been scanned and put online. So I don't know how much thinking has gone into what AI cannot learn that humans know simply because we haven't given it to the internet yet. I'm just curious about that, just as put it out there. For me, I'm not in a position to define artificial intelligence, but I can share with you my observations of what people have said about it. I remembered my earliest encounter with AI was the 1970s in a computer science class in college, and there was a program called ELIZA, I think it was. It was basically a psychologist. you would type something into the computer, and then Eliza would process your sentence. So it had some sort of language recognition, noun, verb, syntax, this sort of thing. And you would have a conversation with Eliza. You would say, I'm not feeling well today. And Eliza would say, tell me about why you think you're not feeling well. Or I had family issues. Well, tell me about your mother. So it would be this. And so I said, wow, I have no idea. In my sort of naive sense of the world, I'm thinking this could be an actual human being on the other side of this. And that would be definitely, from my perspective, passing the fabled Turing test, where if you can't tell if it's not human, then it's, why even care about the distinction? But what I've noticed over the years is that the goalposts keep moving for what people want to say AI is. And so, I'm not in a position to say that anyone is going to define AI today, and then in 10 years, where we're beyond that, say, oh, that wasn't really AI, but this is really AI. So I'm intrigued watching the fact that we have computers beat us at chess, at Go, on Jeopardy. I don't know how worldwide known that game show is, but in fact, just a few days ago, we lost its 35-year host, Alex Trebek. Jeopardy tests knowledge of the world. So they plug the computer into the internet, it has good language skills, boom, it beats the best Jeopardy players ever. So, is that AI? If you had shown that to people 30 years ago, oh my gosh, people would be predicting the end of the world, that computers would take over all that we know, think, and care about. But of course, that hasn't happened yet. So all I just want to say is I don't think anyone is ready to stamp a milepost and say we have passed AI by anyone's measure and understanding of it. I want to add that there's a basic assumption here that we are some measure of intelligence. All right. Now, who's doing the measuring of our intelligence? We are. Okay. So it's not hard for me to imagine some other life form out there that views us the way we view worms. So there's a good and a bad side of that. The good side of it is maybe there's a limit to how much our AI can ever do for us because we're the ones who came up with it and we're not really that smart to begin with. The other side of it is there could be a vast ascent of intelligence far beyond anything our human physiology gives us.
Talking about intelligence,
that leaves open the question, can our abilities create something that much more intelligent than we are? Can a worm create a worm computer that's as smart as a human, if it's a worm that created it in the first place? These are things I think about when I think of the total range of intelligence that might pervade the universe.
That's wonderful, Neil. And just talking about intelligence, I'm really, really interested in what Yuri has to add. So Yuri, what does intelligence mean to you? What is the difference between human and machine intelligence in your eyes from the neuroscience perspective?
Well, it's interesting that we usually contrast and show two opposites. One is human, the other one is the machine. I think we should start with machine versus biology. As Neil said, what about a worm? What about a insect? How intelligent they are. And in biology, intelligence is translated to adaptability. So I think the lifetime of humankind is too short to make a judgment about who is smarter, whether machines will survive us or not. This would be a good measure of intelligence. However, the reason why we need a definition is because without definition, it's very difficult to do science. Take, for example, space and time. Space and time, like intelligent, are abstract, deduced ideas. Ideas become scientific only when we begin measuring them. Measurements, all kinds of measurements, need scales. Time and space became scientific terms when we began measuring duration and distance by clocks and rulers. Intelligence, to many of us, became a scientific term when we made up a scale for measuring IQ in humans. Historically, this was introduced as a tool for selecting soldiers during World War I for particular goals. As you just heard, is this wonderful movie that you put together about how people in the street, they came up their own creative definitions and related them to their own rulers. But there is no agreed common ruler against which we can measure intelligence of humans, other animals, machines, or computer algorithms. This is the crux of the problem for me.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Judy. And actually, we ran out of time. That's what I've been suspecting with surrounded by these many smart brains. But let's jump on to the second topic, our moment in time. So our moment in time, the now of AI, where to begin? AI has captured the imagination of both scientists and science fiction fans for more than 60 years now, I think. But its reality has only become graspable to business and politics and society only a few years ago. So in this section, we were trying to capture where are we in the long journey of AI. Now that 60 years have already passed, how much more do we have until the desired goal? And do we ever achieve that desired goal of artificial general intelligence? So where are we now? Is this a journey? Is this an evolution? Is this intelligence right now? The current AI technologies, the capabilities and the variety of current AI technologies is very, very impressive. The current speed of evolution of AI, the computational power doubling every 2 months, or 3 months actually, sorry. The current penetration of these technologies very, very deep in our lives. And the current value generation of AI, which is estimated to be $9.2 trillion next year. These are all factors that probably show how tremendous the current impact is. But let's ask our panelists a few questions about where do they feel we are right now. Neil, you told us about your first experiment, or sorry, your first impression of AI. What do you think, where did we end up since you first encountered AI? How do you feel about the current penetration? How do you feel like our lives have already been transformed? Or do we have to talk about AI still very much in the futuristic sense?
Yeah, let me first echo Georgi's comment that if you don't have a formal and precise definition we can all agree on, then no one can then agree whether we've hit that spot or not. So that's inherent in this absence of a definition is the uncertainty of where we are relative to it. And to Stuart's point, yeah, I think AI is manifesting in so many parts of our lives incrementally that, and by the way, the world isn't coming to an end because of it, right? So again, most of what we take for granted today in this year, 2020, would be seen as sorcery, even 10 or 20, or even as recently as 10 years ago. The fact that I can drive a car, no, they're not entirely safely self-driving yet, but I can push a button and it can tell me where to get the nearest cup of coffee and how to avoid traffic, and that doesn't involve a human at all. What else would anyone have called that but artificial intelligence in a previous decade? So, and that kind of infusion of computing power and decision-making is now influencing us at every turn in our lives. So I think it's around us and we're getting used to it quickly. One quick point, you know, would you get on an airplane that doesn't have a pilot? And most people would say, no, I would never do that. Well, if you go back 100 years and you said, would you board a train that doesn't have a conductor? And people say, no, of course not. You need a conductor. Well, of course, when you go to airports, you know, every tram that connects terminals does not have a pilot or an engineer. You just get on, and it knows when to close the doors and when to open them, and it tells you and it warns you, and it'll slow down if there's traffic ahead. So I think I think the level to which we're embracing it is real, and it's growing. So the AI of the now I see it continuing in exactly this way indefinitely, with AI performing specific tasks and it'll do that better than any human could have, as distinct from the general AI where the one AI does everything, including make your coffee and drive your car.
So many people are aware of the fact that, our lives, some aspects of our lives are already very much influenced by AI. Our shopping, our entertainment choices, our information consumption, our bank loans. But a lot of it is still invisible, even if it is mainstream in applied AI that affects our lives. So Lotzi, do you think there are good examples in applied AI that exists, that is robust, that is out there, and people have zero idea about it?
There is a saying that in 60 years ago, the best minds created the nuclear bomb in the Manhattan Plan. Now the best minds place advertisements on our websites.
Yes.
But in my mind, this AI is fascinating for the people because this is the first time when something very complex is not made by rules, by equations, but by an artificial neural network, which is a black box, very similarly to our minds. I mean, I am not a scientist. I don't know how similar it is. Probably not, but because it's a black box, we don't understand totally how it is working out the decisions. Like how we don't understand how our wife or kid make their decisions, and that's why people are fascinated, because they don't know how it really works inside.
Thank you, Lotzi. That's very insightful. And Stuart, there was a half sentence in your previous statement that I would like to quote again about the transitional nature and the frontiers of research right now. So research and development. What are the new directions that take us from this machine learning age affecting the now and the near future from your point of view that the world needs to learn more about and that is graspable to the public from the world of research?
So as you correctly state, machine learning is where a lot of the action is right now. This has been going on for about 10 years. The breakthrough actually happened in the early 90s. So what we call deep learning is essentially very, very large circuits, which, as Laszlo pointed out, bear some resemblance to the brain. Those circuits have millions of connections, and those connections can be adjusted by learning algorithms. You adjust the strength of those connections, and that changes what the circuit computes at the end. In the early 90s and even earlier than that, we figured out how to design those circuits and how to write the algorithms that do the adjusting, the learning. And it was really just we had to wait 20 years and make a few minor changes to that. And all of a sudden, with more data and bigger computers, we were able to see that these techniques could solve problems like recognizing objects in images, recognizing speech, doing machine translation, which I use a lot because I move backwards and forwards between the US and France, so I have to pay my taxes in France. So I really have to lean on machine translation is very, very helpful. And 20 years ago, machine translation was just a dream. It didn't work. People have been struggling with it for decades. For myself, one sort of big eye-opening thing was Big Dog, which is a robot that Boston Dynamics produced. I worked on leg locomotion in the early 90s. It's a very difficult problem. Most robots, if you put them on legs, they would fall over within a few seconds. And there was the Boston Dynamics Big Dog.
But if you put them on two legs, they fall over. Right, you put on 6 legs, it's not going to fall over. It's just perfectly stable.
6 legs is easier, but watching Big Dog trotting up a snow-covered hillside, and then it gets to a sort of icy pond, and its feet slip, and then it recovers its balance on this icy surface, and it looks exactly like a living animal. And when I saw that, I said, you know what? Sometimes in AI we actually solve the problem. We don't just struggle for decades and decades, we actually solve the problem. So leg locomotion, machine translation is largely solved. Object recognition to some extent is largely solved. Speech recognition now works really, really well. So the question is, what next? And I think we're in the process of solving extraction of knowledge from language, which is a really, really big step. And then you have to wonder, well, what if we solve the whole thing? Right? There are still some major open problems between where we are right now and human intelligence, but I think that even though it's hard to predict when we're going to solve those, I think we should think about what happens when we succeed. Right? What happens when we remove the barriers that are currently keeping those general purpose AI systems really stupid? When those barriers are gone, what happens then?
Thank you so much, Stuart. There is one question that I wanted to ask from Judy before we actually segue to the next topic, which will be applied AI. But one question that I'm getting here that I've been doing the rounds in the media in preparation for this show is everybody's interested in AI and healthcare, AI and the pandemic. So you being a doctor, what do you think the now of AI is in the medicinal context?
Maybe we can defer that question to the next set of discussion. I just like to challenge Stuart here a little bit,
please,
saying that all with my admiration with the Big Dog, isn't that the same absolute simple principle that Gray Walter with the Machina Speculatrix have put forward 50 years ago? Or if we are praising AI, of course, this is spectacular change, but the fundamental programs in deep learning are pretty much the same that Hinton made up, decades ago. The difference is that the computers are faster, we have GPUs, we have big data, and we've got Wikipedia, that is, things can be trained on with very, very large numbers. So what you call revolution is not really a revolution of AI, it's a revolution of something else. I would like to hear your expert views.
And we have
well, it was a revolution. It just
30 seconds for that, Stuart.
Sure. I mean, it was a revolution. It just took a couple of decades to unfold, and it happened in several stages of big, important ideas, and then it took a while for those ideas to turn out to be correct, and that's fine. General relativity, as Neil will certainly be aware. It took a while before we had experimental evidence that general relativity was actually correct. But that doesn't make it not a revolution.
And we are out of time. Let's segue to the next topic. Applied AI. What can AI do for us? So we have already raised that AI already surrounds us as consumers, users, and workers, and is deeply embedded in our devices, in how we get information, choose our entertainment, how we shop, etc., etc. I really want to spend a lot more time on what are the territories where AI is already robust, but you do not encounter it, as an everyday person. You don't peep under the hood. Where it's last noticed or unnoticed for the public. I think the next frontier will be those territories that are, so to say, boring or unapproachable. But I really wanted to cite a lot more examples from that realm that is not covered that much by the media. So let me start with my example. We hear this statement a lot. Everybody's probably familiar with that. AI is the new electricity. AI is also power. Not just technological power, but it expands to other domains like politics and economy and culture. But so my example should be coming from the power industry. it really comes naturally to cite power and electricity associated with the power industry. Because I really care about the fact that the energy needs of the planet will not decrease anytime soon. So it needs to be much smarter and much sustainable. And the power industry knows that. Also, a lesser known fact that renewables add a lot of complexity to power generation systems. So they actually need AI. They need AI desperately. AI is actually transforming how power is being generated and forecasted and secured and distributed. And you may not know it, or you may not remember the last time you encountered that, but it prevents mass blackouts. When do you remember that oh, by the way, I didn't have a blackout for the last year? So it makes electricity networks a lot more secure, energy markets more fluid, and our power grids smarter. Actually, in a study that I've seen lately, 12 different core AI technologies have been identified as being used worldwide without citizens having an idea how electricity is heading to their apartments and their offices. But also, another small story. A few days ago, I had a taxi driver here in Budapest. Actually, I had another taxi driver driving to SFO who was asking me about bioethics. But in Silicon Valley, it's pretty normal that all Uber drivers have startups, or all startups have Uber drivers on the side. So I had a taxi driver in Budapest. And
until the startup starts making money, then they're not an Uber driver anymore.
Indeed. So here in Budapest, it was a little bit more interesting. So my taxi driver was asking me what I do, and I said artificial intelligence, and he said, "Oh my God, sir, I've been spending the last 3 nights sleepless around artificial intelligence." And I was wondering why. I was thinking about, the usual autonomous vehicles will take away taxi drivers' jobs, but he was actually coming up with a trolley problem, like who the autonomous vehicle should hit in case of an accident, an unavoidable accident, and 3 different targets. So that's a good segue to talk to Laci probably, because there is no one else on this panel who knows more about self-driving cars. So first of all, the question that I'm getting most of the times, how far do you think the time is when autonomous vehicles will actually be dominating the streets? Your best guess. Dominating.
Dominating.
Yeah.
I think it's at least 20 years. Because most of the cars in Europe have an average age of 11 or more than 10. I would simplify this. In Hungary, it's 14. So it takes at least 14 years to replace half of the vehicles, roughly. So it is more than 20. But can I reflect to your problem or the question of the taxi driver? So as Stuart said, perception is mostly solved. Perception is about recognizing the objects around us. But the route planning, the planning of where we go, is still mostly rule-based. So on the other hand, the biggest requirement for a self-driving car is to save the passengers in the car. That's rule number 1. Second, and to achieve this, the first one is to avoid any kind of accidents. And this is where the cars will be better than humans, because their speed of calculation or speed of decision making and the 360-degree view sensing is much better than any human drivers. Mm-hmm. And so avoiding accidents will be the first reason why many people will accept this. But of course, nobody would sit in a car which would sacrifice us, us as passengers. And second, because they can avoid most of the accidents, even those ones which are not able to avoid, they will calculate where is the farthest distance we can slow down the car to a safe position. Mm-hmm. And because then the fourth, or I don't know how many trees are here, or branches of the tree, is to see if it's another vehicle, a tree, or a human. And of course, if only if the passenger can be saved by hitting a tree instead of another human, I think that's the only reason when people will trust their cars, because they don't want to be sacrificed. Of course, I think there will be some, how to say, license terms that you can click on that I'm over 80, I would sacrifice myself if there is somebody. I think there will be some people who will check that checkbox.
Organ donors, the same way, right?
Pardon?
Organ donors.
Organ donors. Yeah, but as we heard at the beginning that one of the worst thing in this pandemic crisis was that most people don't sacrifice. That's what we saw. A few billion people, all of them, they don't really like to sacrifice themselves for anything, and that's one of the bad part of the whole pandemic story.
Another question to you about level 5 autonomy. We raised this in the beginning. So how far are we from that? I mean, there are, companies like, or personalities like Elon Musk or Google's Waymo claiming that they have it. And I think that the biggest quantification or requirement, actually, of level 5 autonomy is to be able to work on any terrain. So what is the reality behind claiming that?
So most of the passenger cars you can buy or you will be able to buy in the next 5 or 10 years are able to handle certain kind of situations like highway, parking, but not necessarily urban driving without human supervision. That's the passenger car situation, because passenger cars need to operate in whole nationwide in the US or whole Europe-wide. On the other hand, the robotaxi companies like Waymo, they operate in very small environments, like smaller cities, where they can fully map everything, and they know the whole environment. And because they want to decrease the risk of any accidents, they started that in smaller cities, in generally pleasant weather environments, like where there is no snow, no
Arizona,
heavy rains,
California, right?
Arizona, in the desert.
Yeah.
And there will be a transition from this passenger car, where some things are automated, like the highway, to more and more complex functions. And of course, the robotaxi guys will try to extend their operatable geographies with more difficult cities, more difficult terrain, and more difficult weather. And sometime in the future that they too will cross each other. But I think when generally automated, like not just level 5 in a small city, but level 5 nationwide car will be available, that's more than 10 years. And it will be still pretty expensive.
Thank you, Laci. So now that we've covered the autonomous vehicles in a short bit, there's a question for the whole panel about AI being transversal. So first of all, can you name a few promising AI applications, especially in your own field of expertise, that are showing the highest promise for humanity? What would be the most beneficial for humanity? Or the other thing that I'm fascinated about is like how certain AI technologies are jumping from one industry to another almost imperceptibly. So what I've seen a few months ago in pharmaceuticals research and drug discovery jumping into battery research. So do you have a few examples of that the audience may find inspiring? Who would like to start?
George, you already mentioned medicine.
Yes, please, Julie. Yes.
AI can be enormously useful in medicine. The pattern recognition and unsupervised classification have become the major strengths of AI. These are extremely useful skills in dermatology, radiology, oncology. AI can quantify and quantitatively identify similar cases and compare the images against enormous data banks. There are already systems like isometrics, so QBIM or RoboVision, that are trainable machine learning platforms to detect wide range of diseases. Such skills require decades of training for humans. The goal, of course, is not to replace the human judgment, but assist it in a way not possible before. Even in suicide management, responding robots already appear as effective as the average human first responder. Robotic surgery is now a household term. Almost in every major hospital, there is a robotic surgeon suite. AI is super useful in the analysis of genomic sequences and mining data sets in brain research. You may know that AI is the main basis of electronic health record in the United States, and this is very promising in telemedicine that is developing at a super speed now during COVID. IBM and Google's DeepMind are aggressively developing AI algorithms for healthcare. Great results have been reported this year on breast cancer, prostate cancer. Wearable sensors, such as Fitbit and SmartRing, monitor devices of more than 50 million registered users worldwide, and new gadgets emerge daily. Monitoring the pattern of strikes on the computer keyboard or tracking your eye movements, pupil size, heart rate during reading, while you are reading or working on a computer, of tens of billions of users can provide unprecedented amount of analyzable and quantifiable biological data. While you are watching a movie or being interviewed for a job, sensors that are put on you can collect information about your reactions, health states, and even desires, generating large amounts of biometric data that will eventually be owned by somebody. New senses for magnetic fields, infrared, ultraviolet light, or even radioactivity can easily be incorporated into the brain. Direct brain-to-brain telepathic communication sounds futuristic at the moment, but the laws of physics do not warn us that such technology is impossible. Rather, for me, the big question is, who needs such technology and who will reap the profits? The development of these extraordinary techniques that Laszlo talked about and many of us are imagining is likely to be different depending on whether they are driven by scientific curiosity, therapeutic considerations, or commercial interests.
Again, we ran out of time, Yuri. That was wonderful contribution, and we are definitely betting big, betting high on the healthcare uses of AI. But now, the time has come to take a walk on the dark side. AI is a double-edged sword. Some luminaries have called it an existential threat for our civilization. And it's not just a double-edged sword. Actually, its power is more like a double-edged star destroyer or something like that. But as Neil said in one of his interviews that he gave to Hungarian media a few days ago, we have to talk about this dark side to make sure that it doesn't happen. I think he was quoting Ray Bradbury. So nothing is inevitable. But we need to be aware of what can go wrong to see what needs to change. There are some issues that are inherent with AI technologies, and there is a lot more that human developers or clients or users add to them. Not to mention what happens when it is being abused by actors who are immoral or amoral. And the race mentality that we are experiencing in this world, right, the AI race for dominance, that it's somewhat being called, it doesn't help at all. So usually when people ask me about these darker aspects of how it can go wrong, I'm citing the number of states, how many states are engaged in national strategies, AI national strategies. The current figure is about 60 of countries who have devised some kind of AI societal strategy. However, the number of countries who are engaged in autonomous weapon systems, so basically AI for war purposes, is about 20, 30 higher than that. And the highest number, above 100, is countries who are engaged in AI-powered disinformation campaigns. So that's a word of warning. So we need to talk about ethics. We need to talk about what's right and wrong. And we need to talk about when something goes right or wrong. Was it the machine? Was it the man? How can we infuse machines with morality? Governments and corporations are working on AI ethics codes for years now. I think the latest figure I've seen was around 280, but the public barely knows about them. We believe it's a strategic imperative. Having ethics associated deeply with AI, infusing AI is a strategic imperative. So Stuart, you wrote a book where you are talking about this in great detail. What traits, what domains, what applications or impact make you most concerned right now? What are the most dire ethical challenges to overcome soon? And what would be needed to succeed to tackle these?
Let's see. Well, how many hours do we have?
About 5.
Right. So I think all the things you mentioned are very serious concerns. But I'll just talk about 2 of them. So the weapons and then surveillance, the use of AI to observe and control people. And we'll worry about the end of the world later in the discussion. So weapons, weapons with AI means that the weapon can find human targets, can decide to attack, and can kill the human being without a human supervisor intervening in the process. So these are called lethal autonomous weapon systems. And this is not, the concern is not that it's going to turn into Skynet and Terminators and they're going to rise up and take over the world and kill everybody. Most people have been worrying about the fact that these systems are probably going to be quite stupid and they might accidentally, kill civilians or somehow get out of control and there would be a terrible accident. And that is a concern, but I think the technology, unfortunately, is improving. And it's important to understand that this is not science fiction, right? These are real weapons. You can go onto the web. For example, the Turkish company STM advertises a drone that's about this big, the size of a football, carries a kilogram of explosive, and they advertise that it can track and autonomously hit human beings. So advertising on the web, right? This is not science fiction. These are real systems that are being sold. And the problem with those kinds of systems is that because they're autonomous, because they don't need human supervision, you can launch millions of them at the same time. You could wipe out a city, or you could wipe out a whole ethnic group within a city or within a country. So they are weapons of mass destruction, and they're much cheaper. They're easier to use than nuclear weapons. They don't leave a huge radioactive smoking crater, and so on. And this is the reason why we need to ban them. So it's not so much an ethical reason as just a common sense reason. We don't want another class of weapon of mass destruction that is very likely to be used, particularly against civilian populations. So I'm worried that countries are blindly getting into this arms race where they say, oh, well, the Russians are going to have them or the Chinese are going to have them, so we have to have them. And then everyone's security is drastically reduced. The second thing I want to talk about, surveillance. We already are aware that our phones and our laptops are tracking our movements. They're in some sense reading our emails and listening to our conversations and so on. So, whereas in the good old days you had to have a human spy or a human informer to do that for you, and those spies are very expensive and unreliable and sometimes inept. The AI system can do it for free, 24/7 for every single person in a country. And that's a real threat because, in engineering, we think of sensing is the first step towards control. Right? You can't control the system unless you can sense what it's doing so you can sort of nudge it in the direction you want it to go. And with humans, we can nudge people. We can give them positive feedback or negative feedback in the appropriate situations. They may not even realize they're being controlled, but that control system can be extremely effective. So this is already starting to happen. China has what they call their social credit score, and they have essentially nationwide visual surveillance and information system surveillance of their people, and they are exporting this now to other countries, other governments who want to use it. And really, if you think about what's in your pocket, what's on your phone, it's a bunch of representatives, depending on which country you're in. It could be representatives of corporations or representatives of the government sitting in your pocket, right? And the whole idea of human rights in the digital world simply doesn't exist anymore. And these things have got to change. Otherwise, we are going to find ourselves in a world where freedom is just something that happened back in the 20th century and doesn't exist anymore.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Neil, another widely mediatized aspect of AI is that it increases polarization in society, both politically and economically, and it aggregates inequality, and it also perpetuates human bias. It's not being fair all the time. So what are your thoughts about that? The labor consequences of that, the fairness consequences of that? Have you experienced anything like that in the US or in your practice?
Yeah, so of course there's much written and spoken about the tribalization of us in modern time in the hands of advertisers, in the hands of, you know, the whole Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram universe, where you're fed things that prompt you to, if you started feeling one way, it can make you feel more that way and more divisively that way. And this is the point that Stuart was making about not even knowing that you're being manipulated in the intensity of your thoughts. And so this is bad. By the way, I don't think the bias that you're commenting on is anything that humans didn't already have, right? So the issue here is not that it's giving us bias where it wasn't there before, it's magnifying the bias that we already had. And so, of course, this is one tiny aspect of the power of AI, all right? It's how to serve advertisers, right? It's a tiny bit of all that AI can be, ever will be, but its effects can be devastating. By analogy here, I just want to say that I think on the whole, AI is better for us than not better for us. And the need for regulation or rules and ethical parameters is paramount. So you go back 100 years ago, 110 years ago, so the internal combustion engine car arrives, and all right, people are getting killed in the car, they're hitting people in the street. So do you ban the car? No, you say, we like the car. It is so useful, it rendered horses obsolete that we've been using for thousands of years. That's how useful cars were. So we say, this is really useful, let's invent a traffic light. Let's invent crosswalks. Let's make cars safer. Let's anti-lock brakes, seat belts, crush zones. So now driving a car has a rule book. And there are rules about who drives a car and what tests you pass and what your driving record is. So I think taking a cue from that exercise where cars are still with us, in spite of the fact that in the United States, 30,000 people a year die in them or are hit by them, in spite of that fact, the dangers of AI, some of them we might have to see after the fact. Oh my gosh, didn't see that coming, let's make a rule. So yes, as any powerful technology that serves us in one hand and kills us in another, tells us we need, yes, going forward, wise governance of the application of AI is essential. And a quick thing, I don't want to take up all my time here, but in the US military, there are documents in place ready to establish that an AI kill cannot happen unless a human is in that loop. So in contrast to the Turkish drone you can just buy on the internet, okay? The rules of engagement, at least at the highest levels of the US military, don't want to remove a human decision if it involves a human life.
We are running out of time. There are so many ethical aspects that we need to tackle. The last one I wanted to mention is expectability, the black box effect, that our AI systems have become so complex that there is nobody able to trace back a certain decision or a certain recommendation to how the actual machine came to that decision. So that's one of the biggest barriers in front of regulation. And of course, the proprietary data that belongs to companies behind it. So this is one thing that many governments in the world are currently working on, coming up with new regulatory frameworks to tackle that. And of course, this will need new directions in research as well. Let's go to the next topic, intelligence explosion. With baby steps now, we are inching towards the future. We have increasingly intelligent machines, or just the semblance of intelligence. What is the most useful approach? How does AI learn? They may serve us, may coexist or merge with us. They may dominate us. They may expand our cognition or make us obsolete. So here come the nuances from the panel, hopefully. I think that we are on the hard path of making machine intelligence serve augmented human intelligence. There was one topic raised by Stuart already in language, and I think we need to talk about GPT-3, which is a highly mediatized language model created by OpenAI that is owned by Microsoft. It has been celebrated across the media as a breakthrough in language models. The simple concept, if you haven't followed this story, is that you give them a few lines of text, and it can write text based on the immense amount of data and parameters that it has in the style of anyone on Earth. This can rewrite the content industry, and of course, it is very much of interest for the disinformation industry as well. Stuart, do you think this is a breakthrough or an early start?
So it's a very interesting question. They haven't really made it completely available. So there is limited access for academics. And Microsoft has just announced that another language model I think it's called the Turing LM, is going to be available to academics. And I think the results so far are a mixed bag. Some of the experiments I've seen are really quite impressive. So, for example, you just say, you know, an algorithm that determines whether a word is a palindrome, and it writes code for you in Python, and the code mostly works, and you can make the problem more complicated, and it makes more complicated code. And so it looks like it has somehow managed to extract some generalizations from the massive amount of text that it's ingested. And when I say massive amount, it really is millions of books, billions of web pages, billions of lines of programming code in dozens of languages, you name it. If they sort of vacuum it up from the web and feed it into their system. So to be clear, what is a language model? A language model is just something that, given a sequence of words, will generate the next word in that sequence. If you say, you know, Chelsea beat Manchester United for, what comes next? Well, it's going to be a number, and it's going to be less than 4. Right? And I think GPT has extracted enough understanding from the text that it's read that it will probably get that thing right. But if you then continue, okay, what comes after the, you know, let's say it's 4.3, right? What comes after that? Well, a human being doesn't know. So what GPT-3 does is it goes back to all of the text that it has about football matches, and it starts spitting out sentences or modifications of sentences where, you know, if it was Bayern Munich, they replaced Bayern Munich with Chelsea, and if it was, you know, Lazio, they replaced Lazio with Manchester United. So now it's a story about Chelsea versus Manchester United, and it kind of might even make up a commentary on the game. So to some extent, it's sort of regurgitation with adaptation. And the big question is, we don't know how much adaptation GPT-3 can do. There are examples that look great, And there are examples that look absolutely, completely stupid, right? So it'll say, Chelsea beat Manchester United 4-3, and Reckitt Benckiser Limited recently completed its merger with blah, 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 you know, and bought a warehouse outside of Budapest, which is filled with large piles of water or something. You know, so it's complete nonsense that's totally irrelevant. And so you can see that it's not really an intelligent system. In some ways, I call it a sort of a randomized parrot. But there's an element of intelligence there in some of the examples that is a little worrying, let's say.
Mm-hmm. It's so intelligence is going to be a very unscientific statement, but intelligence may be in the eye of the beholder because it has deceived many. So Neil, I mean, intelligence explosion is basically another term for artificial general intelligence, the human equivalent intelligence. And of course, this definition of like human equivalence would take 5 hours from us. But to take a practical lens, what do you think would be the 3 most important things and an artificial general intelligence should do if it ever comes? And we will get back to the if it ever comes question.
Yeah, I part ways with many other thinkers in this regard. I don't see human intelligence as a model of anything. I think we have this biological system with neurosynaptic connectors that carries evolutionary baggage deep within it. And why should we be the model of what a computer should emulate? Back to Stuart's earlier point about was it Boston Robotics dog going onto the ice, looking and feeling like it has the essence of dog in the machine, but why imitate a dog? I mean, another biological form. If you want to go on ice and not slip, you would design it completely differently. You would not say, well, I got to give it 4 legs and this. No, you would think about the problem differently. So to say what are the 3 targets of artificial intelligence so that it can be smart like us, I don't want to use us as a model. I want to have my goals outside of us and say, here's a thing I wanted to do, and I wanted to do better than any human. Go, okay? Yes, the game go as well. Start, okay? And is this any different from the Industrial Revolution, where you had people and oxen drawing plows, but then we had machines to do this, and you had people sorting food, and we have machines to do it. And they do it better than humans can do it, and they do it faster. And it didn't signal the end of civilization, it progressed civilization. And some people lost their jobs initially, depending on the pace at which such technologies arrive. The response of society will be different, all right? And with the point of self-driving cars, back to, was it Laszlo who said that? Yeah, with self-driving cars, if that happens as fast as everyone thinks, then the huge population of, for example, men whose entire livelihood is driving a vehicle becomes unemployed, practically overnight. And so I don't know if I'm addressing your question or dancing around it. All I'm saying is I don't see humans as the model for this. I see other tasks that we care about, and let that rise up around us. And then we all just go to the Bahamas. While
That's very insightful. That's very insightful, Neil. And I think many people will sign up to that plan of creating a new race of tools, actually. Judy, do you concur with Neil, or do you see it differently from... Do we have to model it after humans?
I'd like to say that the humans are special creatures. And they are special because we learn some tricks. And the tricks are how to externalize brain function. This is the way how to augment brain function. Our success as humans is mainly due to our ability to do this. We augmented our physical abilities by using a stick, a lever, or invented the steam engine. We created artifacts such as paintings and writing, which are extremely powerful enhancers of communication among brains. Artifacts are externalized versions of the thought, a reflection of the contemplation and the way of communicate personal knowledge to others even after we die. So AI to date is perhaps the most effective cognitive enhancer. I think a good partnership between, I can call it a hybrid, it's a co-evolution between neuroscience and AI would be extraordinarily exciting, because these brain-inspired machines may produce ideas in surprising and unforeseen domains. I don't have time here, but I just like to say that AI is on the wrong track in this, because it is inspired by the wrong brain model. And if you are interested in why I have this extreme view, I can expand on some other forum or later. We often find ourselves simultaneously saddened and enthusiastic when we learn that, you just mentioned that, Kasparov was beaten by a machine. But we forget that the robot and supercomputers are built by hundreds to thousands of interactive human brains. No wonder that such a machine can beat one single Homo sapiens. But of course, the argument can go the other way as well. Our knowledge is rich, not only because the performance of the human brain, as the hardware that I have up here, but because there are 10 billion brains on this planet. A good fraction of them can communicate effectively, facilitated by the internet, which is the new agora for exchanging externalized knowledge on a global scale. So in short, what I envision, hopefully, is the right partnership between AI researchers, that is humans, AI researchers and brain scientists, and obedient machines to augment our cognitive abilities, rather than a deadly competition as we discussed a minute ago.
Can I add to your point, Georgi, that you danced around it, but I want to put an emphasis on it. If you take Isaac Newton, for example, a very important person in my field, you don't arrive at him from the sum of other people. You don't get what he wrote by having a billion brains learn all that humans have ever said and thought about physics. So the human brain has the ability to have a thought that has never been had before, that does not derive from the synthesis of everything that all other humans have written. And so I would put the question to the panel, what is the capacity of AI, even if it's self-learning, based on all that humans have done before, what is the capacity to have a thought that has never been had before? And for that reason, I kind of like being human.
Neil, you shouldn't forget that Isaac Newton made his discoveries during the pandemic plague.
Yeah.
He was spending 3 years without Zoom and telephone.
And without HBO and Netflix to distract him at night.
Yeah.
Right.
We have 48 seconds remaining, so quick reactions from Lotzi or Stuart to that question.
So I agree with Neil. I don't think the human per se is the measure, but humans exhibit a certain kind of universality, meaning that a vast range of tasks can be accommodated by the human mind. We can learn what the task is, we can learn what we need to know to do it, and we can do it. And there's a mathematical sense of universality that goes back to Turing machines, and I think in some sense the human mind exhibits that with respect to its intelligent behavior. And that's the sense in which AI is going to be general purpose intelligence. It'll be able to do anything. And so right now, Laszlo and his colleagues are spending decades developing one specific technology to drive a car. But with general purpose AI, that problem is already solved. You'd simply, you'd just connect up the general purpose AI to the steering and the brakes of the car, and you say, drive the car. And then the system will figure out, run a bunch of simulations in its mind, figure out what matters in driving and just do it. And the same thing with plowing the fields, and the same thing with writing the newspaper articles, and possibly the same thing with doing the physics. And the question is, once you have general purpose AI, what's left for human beings? And I like the Bahamas, I like cruise ships, but I don't want to be on a cruise forever. And if we're all on a cruise forever, which happened in Wall-E, right, then we become,
Wall-E, yeah.
right? We lose the incentive to understand and propagate our own civilization because we don't have to do it anymore. We've done it now for 100,000 generations, and maybe we'll stop having to do it, and that will be really bad.
Actually, being in the Bahamas sounds like a simulation to me. Forever. Lots of quick reactions. Will your car ever become conscious and run away with your speedboat?
I think the current AI is just a complex way of data processing. That's my view. There is no consciousness. There is no instinct. I think if we build AI to have instincts and consciousness, that will change the things. But currently, it's just very high performance data processing machines.
Right, to Georgi's point, we don't really have a good I don't think, though I will defer, that we have a good definition of consciousness. The fact that people keep writing books on consciousness is evidence that we know nothing about it. And so to say we're going to program consciousness into a computer when we don't understand it in ourselves, I think is a pipe dream at this point.
Absolutely agree with you, Neil. I learned it the hard way that to raise the whole topic of consciousness to scientists is the wrong path, usually. Okay, we are out of time for this topic. Let's jump to our last exercise, envisioning AI in the future of humans. What is the purpose of AI for our civilization? What image should it take? These were the questions that we started, the big questions that we started out with in the beginning. How ready are we in our ways of thinking, our values, our institutions of an AI-driven future? In pursuit of an AI society, how will the next generation of AI support that? So I'm asking Stuart first, because of your book and your wonderful thoughts on that. How do you think AI will become and stay human compatible?
So let's consider the alternative, right? So we're going to build, if all things turn out well, at least from the technological point of view, we're going to build systems that are more powerful than human beings. It's our intelligence that gives us power over the world. So you're creating entities that are more powerful than us. And the question is, how do we maintain power over them forever? How do we guarantee that? And there's no model for that anywhere in the universe that we know of. The more intelligent species, us, dominates the other species on Earth because of our intelligence. And Alan Turing, who's the founder of computer science, who got this whole thing going in the first place, basically said there's no hope. He said we should have to expect the machines to take control. So I'm actually more optimistic than that. I think there is some hope, but only if we really change the way we think about AI. Because the way we design AI right now, and I borrowed a phrase from physics, I call this the standard model, is basically that we create machinery that optimizes the achievement of objectives, and then we plug the objectives in. So if you get into a self-driving car, you plug the objective in, you say, take me to the airport. And then the system figures out how to do it and does it. And that sounds okay, but just remember what King Midas said, right? King Midas said, make it so that everything I touch turns to gold. And he did it, he got exactly what he wanted. The gods, in this case, not the AI, but the gods gave him exactly what he asked for, his objective.
There's no difference here.
And then God's AI, all the same thing. So
our overlords, yes.
And what happened? So of course, his food and his drink turns to gold, and his family turns to solid gold, and then he dies in misery and starvation. And so this whole standard model just doesn't work in the real world. It's not possible to express correctly and completely what we want the future to be like. And we can't anticipate all the ways that the AI system might carry out the stated objectives in ways that make us unhappy. So we might say, okay, I want the AI system to help us restore carbon dioxide levels to pre-industrial concentration so we can get the climate back in balance. And maybe it just uses up a quarter of the oxygen in the process. And then we all slowly die of asphyxiation. And say, okay, I meant restore carbon dioxide levels, but don't use up the oxygen in the atmosphere. Well, and it turns the oceans into sulfuric acid, et cetera, right? There's always going to be ways in which this approach fails. So what we have to do actually is get rid of that standard model altogether, right? We have to have machines that know that they don't know what the objective is. They still want to help us achieve our objectives, but they don't know what those are. And that's a different kind of AI. It's actually more difficult to do from a technological point of view, but it is feasible, and we can show, at least in simple cases, that it's actually going to be beneficial to humans. So when my book is called Human Compatible, because I really mean compatible with human existence. And right now, the standard model of AI is not compatible with human existence in the long run. So we need to actually change the way we do things.
Lotzi.
Stuart, can you imagine artificial creativity? Because I think that's the big division for me. So it has been already mentioned by Neil, I don't know, maybe not him, but that data processing, making relationships and conclusions out of lots of data is one thing, creating new things is another thing. And I see that most of the jobs which are could be in danger of AI are the repetitive tasks, making simple use, relatively simple use of earlier data sets, like lawyers, and those ones. Those ones are.
We always make fun of lawyers.
Yeah, insert lawyer joke.
No, I think you're right. I think that the repetitive physical and mental labor will be the first to be fully automated, and that maybe that's 80% of the jobs in the world. But even areas like journalism, we think of journalism as requiring the creative ability to tell a story, to understand the facts, to present them in a way that's understandable and engaging, and so on and so forth. But already there are companies using language models to actually write a whole lot of content on the web. Some estimates up to a third of the online news stories now are written by machines. So I think we may.
In fact, there's a weekly analysis of my Twitter activity where I first read it. I said, "Wow, they're really paying attention to to what I'm posting." And then I read it the next week, and it was structurally identical, but they swapped out a few extra adjectives. And so then I spoke with some friends of mine, and they said, "Yeah, a bot wrote that." So yeah, it was a whole. And what percent of all of it are you saying it is right now?
I've heard up to a third. I don't know.
Oh man. Ooh. Okay.
Yeah, that's eerie.
Robots can write poems.
Yeah.
You can buy pictures, and that are aesthetically pleasing. Robots can or machines can compose music. So do we call this creativity or not? That's a very interesting issue, because again we need a definition. But I'd like to bring back Neil's worry about governance. Machines are not dangerous. Humans and corporations and governments are. It is becoming clear, and we are talking about the future, that the new nuclear weapon is AI and robotics. This explains why governments rapidly increase their spending on AI, even often at the expense of other military budget. So what is that the audience, people out there, can do? Perhaps the most critical program is to build a societal control to combat against skewed distributions of many, many things. So we benefit from AI relatively equally. The problem is that the strongest supporters of AI research to date are the military and big tech companies such as DeepMind, Google, Alphabet, that expects large profits from the science their supported scientists produce. This bias is dangerous. The adverse consequences of big funding tobacco industry and big oil companies are relatively easy to expose. But who can tell me how we can find tangible and direct measures of the deleterious effects, consequences of big tech support of AI? So we humans are driven, this is another characteristics, and probably very different from robots. We are driven by short-term benefits of technology and economic envy of others at the expense of long-term deleterious consequences. So watch out for such dangers, especially in academia. If you are in academia, even if you are a good human being and no one acts maliciously, if a big chunk of your funding comes from financially or politically interested entities, your full control is guaranteed, even when no threat is involved. Such systems, as again Neil said, they just simply exploit human nature. There is no free lunch in this. So I think the future is not only development, but simultaneously build a governance structure.
Yep, I would say there's one very simple rule that we could actually enforce, and I think pretty much everyone I've ever talked to agrees with this rule, that you always have a right to know whether you're interacting with a human being or a machine. And just let's put that rule into place as a way of planting a flag for human rights in the digital world. That would be a great start. I think the second step would be don't build algorithms that can decide to kill human beings. So if we can just get those two things, I think we're in much better shape.
We would be
by the way, that's a low bar, I think.
Yes. So I would actually
be surprised.
I would aim a little higher than that.
Try to. One other security risk I wanted to add, I forgot to mention it earlier. Let's look at this self-driving car scenario. A person doesn't have to drop 1 kilogram bombs on people with drones. All they have to do is hack into the GPS system that allows cars to drive at very high speeds and not get into collisions, and you can bring an entire grid of transportation to its knees. So modern warfare is not how many people do you kill, it's how many people do you disable from whatever it was they were doing before. And so this is a whole other definition of what national security means in the face of AI.
So last question, because we ran out of time, but a quick round robin adding to your earlier points, or if you haven't spoken in this round. What is that, assuming that the audience is, people who care about their future and want to take back their future, and assuming that we have a lot of political and business and societal leaders on the end of the line, what should they do? What is the first thing that they could do? What should people call out for? What should business leaders and political leaders start the job with?
Wrong start, what you said, because we are talking about business leaders and political leaders who are already biased. We are talking about many people who should be saying something who are not biased.
Absolutely. So we need a societal movement, and I got that point. That's definitely something that needs to be done. But the institutions are currently existing institutions. How can they change the equation? How can they change the paradigm? Because I still believe that there are lots of leaders in the world who understand the threat of it and do not necessarily want to exploit it.
Yeah, I think an AI arms race is inevitable. People are inherently distrustful of others who are not in their tribe. And so, we managed to survive, we think, the nuclear arms race. And so that as a model for, again, a low bar, that we didn't kill ourselves, very, very low bar. But I think some of that's inevitable. And so I think the real goal here should be, can and will AI make our lives better? I'd like Georgi's comment about just simply augmenting our mental capacities. That we've got to feel good about that. If we can have a machine that improves what it is we do and how we perform at it. And I see that as a goal. And I don't know if that can be contained within a few tenets or principles of the future of AI. But I'd like AI to show up in as many places as it possibly can, again, so I can spend more time in the Bahamas.
All right, so this concludes our section, our envisioning exercise, and this is time for the Q&A now. So now...
Wait, can I jump in for a sec?
Of course.
Can I explain why I think you have sheep behind you?
Please explain it.
Okay.
Can I or can you?
No, I would like to explain why I think you have sheep behind you.
Yes.
Okay. Because the short story novel on which the movie Blade Runner was based was called "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?"
Absolutely.
And so you have sheep in some kind of neurogrid there. And I'm just wondering, is that the reason why whoever put the sheep behind you did it?
It was
very
much...
It's a very famous science fiction story.
It was very much intentional. Fortunately, people read Philip K. Dick here.
Okay. Yes, forgive me, it's Phil K. Dick story, yes.
So, this concludes...
Sorry to interrupt.
No worries, Neil. That was a very important piece of information because I recommended it to the kids in the beginning who may have not read Philip K. Dick before. All right.
And it's completely weird to have floating sheep behind the host of an AI show.
I give you that. I very much give you that. So, time for the questions, Q&A section. And the way I would like to deal with this is that I'm going to read out the questions. Some of them are in English, some of them are in Hungarian, so I have to do a little translation at certain points. So I read it out loud, and please pick it up, dear panelists, whoever feels that it's closest to you, or I will call you out if I think it's in your domain. First question from the US, from Marcus Allen. Hi, Marcus. When I talk to my friends about AI, they think I'm alarmist. How do we help the average person understand the impact of AI? Anyone wants to take the question?
In my experience, what you do is you tell them all the ways AI has already helped their lives and various sort of subsets of what AI is. You're already doing it. So it's not just something on the horizon that you're waiting and scared of. You have already embraced it, whether or not you know it. And once people realize that, I think that the pathway forward will be broader and more civil than thinking it's just something lurking over the horizon that will show up and turn us all into their pets.
I'm thinking our Marcus is actually at the other end of the scale. So he's an alarmist and his friends are not.
Oh, he's the alarmist.
Yes. So he probably should cite a few examples of, where things can go wrong and how things are actually problematic in the present paradigm.
Yeah, I would say the example that Neil himself mentioned earlier, the use of AI to select the content that billions of people spend most of their waking lives reading and watching. The algorithms on Facebook, on YouTube, and so on. Those have more power over the information intake of human beings than Stalin or Hitler ever had. And they have made, in some ways, they have made a big mess of our world already. They are driving people towards extremes simply because when you're at the extreme, you're a more predictable consumer of content. And that's all the algorithm wants, is that it can predict that what it's going to send you, you're going to consume. It doesn't care whether you have a brain, doesn't care whether you have political opinions or anything. You're just a sequence of clicks. And if they can be more profitable clicks, it's going to turn you into that person. So this is something that's already having an impact. And the way we've gone about it has been a complete disaster.
Yeah, and you still think that you have free will. That's the most difficult part. All right, next question in Hungarian. I will try to translate it. Is there any quantification possible in the case of AI, like IQ in the case of humans? Is there any kind of measurement? Judy, maybe?
Oh, that's a Stuart question.
Or that's a Stuart question.
So in simple terms, no. So IQ only makes sense for humans because there's a strong correlation between the abilities of a given human to solve different kinds of mental tasks, right? And imagine that, some people can only do math tasks, some people can only do word tasks, some people can only do picture tasks, right? So you would get, on a given IQ test, everyone would get exactly a third of the questions right and 2/3 of the questions wrong. Well, then you would say, okay, IQ is a useless measure, right? Saying that all those people have an IQ of 1/3 or whatever is just completely meaningless. And AI systems are way worse than that, right? Google, the search engine, is amazing at doing what search engines do, but it can't play chess at all. Whereas, you know, Deep Blue can play chess better than a human being, but it can't do search engine stuff at all. And neither of them can get out of a paper bag because they don't have bodies and they can't move and they can't do planning in the real world at all. So there's just no single scale that makes any sense for AI systems right now. It will be kind of like, you know, having a horse compete in the decathlon, right? I mean, yeah, it can run fast, but it can't throw the discus. So why are you testing it in the decathlon, right? It just doesn't make sense.
Right, but you do rank AI in terms of levels. There is a vector there, correct? Which starts at this simple AI, general AI. There is a hierarchy. That's in a way an IQ for AI, isn't it?
Well, I would think of it as a kind of a giant lattice, and at each development in research moves us along one of the sticks in the lattice, and we get to a new point. And then another piece of research moves us on another stick. And eventually, when we get to general purpose AI, then I think it does make sense to talk about IQ. And probably it'll be much bigger than humans because machines have vast capacities for processing and memory that greatly exceed what human beings have, at least when we're unaided. So I worry that coming back to what Georgi said, you know, we want to augment human brains with electronic devices. I worry that, you know, you're not even going to be able to get into high school unless you've had brain surgery to implant a bunch of devices. And this seems to suggest that we made a mistake somewhere, if that's the future.
Well, the mistake that we are making is, as I try to allude to it, that we are making the wrong comparison. The wrong comparison is compare my simple brain to a most complicated AI device that thousands and thousands of extraordinary good minds created. The comparison should be one machine, another human being, or the machine kind versus humankind. So it's possible, quite right, that machines made by many humans is smarter than I am. But this is not the question. The question is whether machines will be smarter than all of us together.
Hey, I would add, when I was younger, back when PCs became available, widely available, and they'd come with games, and one of them, there was like a chess engine. You know, each one would have chess. So it beat me every time. All right, but I said, well, no, let me do something more interesting. So I put the chess engine from the Apple Macintosh against the Microsoft, the IBM-based PC, and the Mac just wiped the floor with the other. It was just fun. You know, you just have one play against the other. That was just really fun in the early days. And so if there was a chess IQ, it was very clear who was doing the winning and who was doing the losing.
So next question in English. We tried to tackle some of this before, but the question goes like, can a machine be taught ethics, empathy, or compassion? Who wants to take this?
I would be happy to say something about this.
Please go ahead, Judy. So
machines don't have a first-person perspective of anything. You know, things like feelings, happiness, or a joke doesn't mean anything to a machine, even though we say, oh, the computational models are trained to symbolize or represent the input patterns. So because they don't have any of these features, they don't have the ability to see our intentions or read our intentions from our actions. Therefore, if that doesn't happen, then they don't have the right moral, or they don't have the right ethic. You can program, as you can program anything in a machine, how to behave under certain circumstances. For example, when a machine can read my blood pressure or my surprising face and so on, and then it can respond relatively biologically, so to speak, But none of these things that we call emotion-based are within reach. And the most important thing is that they don't have intention as such, will be missing for a while from a machine or from many, many machines.
Yeah, I think that's basically right. I think they can behave ethically in the sense that they can weigh the pros and cons of an action and their effects on other people, and they can be completely altruistic because machines don't have to have any self-interest at all, unlike human beings. But
unless
empathy,
they're how.
Right?
Unless they...
Empathy, right? Empathy means bringing the suffering within. And so, if you think about it, right, we have this amazing ability. We know what it's like to be another person. If you hit your thumb with a hammer, right, I can find out what that's like, right? I can find out by hitting my own thumb with a hammer, okay? Now, the machine has no way to do this. It could have a PhD in neuroscience. It can be, you can stick a big MRI around your head, but that's not going to help it understand what it's like to hit your thumb with a hammer, right? So in this sense, humans are going to have call it a competitive advantage over machines. And so my prediction for the future of what people will be doing when the machines are doing all the jobs, it'll be the personal relationships that involve empathy, that involve understanding what it's like. What it's like to be, jilted by your lover, what it's like to be a parent for the first time, what it's like to look out of a window on a sunny morning. Machines simply will have no idea, and we can help each other have much better lives because of that understanding.
I would add that even if you programmed in a sense of ethics or morality, if you look over time, over the decades, certainly over the centuries, our human societal morality has evolved. So if 100 years ago, that's 90 years ago, an emergent morality in the eugenics movement was you need to sterilize the undesirables. That was an ethical judgment made by people in power at the time, which today would be viewed completely reprehensibly. So apart from whether computers develop their own morality, even if we programmed it in, you'd have to keep an eye on it as we evolved culturally and emotionally in civilization.
And the next one is also for you, Neil, from a big fan from Hungary, as I'm reading it. Neil, do you believe that AI will be able to solve interstellar travel in the future, hence saving the human race?
Yeah, I hope so.
Do you believe?
They do it in the movies,
yeah.
surely.
There was a movie about that, yeah.
Yeah, so what we really need, the problem is humans, our physiology is incompatible with the duration, the flight duration from our solar system to any other star system. And I can make this visual very trivially. So if you look at the period that appears at the end of a sentence, a full stop, I guess they say in the UK, if that is the physical size of our sun, the nearest star is 4 miles away. So space is mostly empty. And all the great space travel things we've been doing is to the moon, we got probes to Mars, to Pluto. That all happens within our lifetimes, all right? No scientist would ever plan an experiment where the results of the experiment occur after they die. So we've got rockets fast enough to do things in the solar system within the lifetime of a scientist. Space travel is outside of our lifetime. So what you would need is a new understanding of the fabric of space-time that allows you to sort of cheat the speed of light limit by warping space. And of course, this happens in every single science fiction movie. You would need AI to be, not just know everything humans know, but be more creative than we have ever been to figure out how to warp space in an affordable, engineering, sensible way. And based on conversations we've had in this last 90 minutes, I don't see that forthcoming ever.
All right, question about disinformation or deepfakes in general. For those who don't know what deepfakes are, they are artificially generated video and audio content usually used for disinformation purposes or other kind of nefarious purposes. But the question is, what do you all think about the future of deepfakes? I would love to talk about the present of deepfakes, but how can it be used to benefit mankind? That's a twist. How can we defend against malicious use? That's not a twist. So what do you know and think about deepfakes and how influential they are in our lives? Latsi, do you have an opinion?
Deepfake is a very similar technology to the when you virtually try out a new dress. It's very similar. I think it's just a bad use case, but I think trying a new glasses or a new dress is something everybody would like to do without going to the actual shops and visiting hundreds of or infinite number of shops. But obviously, I think it's not easy to moderate this kind of content, but I just have one very strange example when the mobile phones and the cheap cameras appeared in the market, or the cheap computers where you could create new music. Everybody expected that the internet will be full of Oscar-winning movies, but nothing happened. I think.
And Oscar movies got words.
I think it's there will be content which is fake, but I think all of the conclusion of our discussion is that people will be able to compare what's fake and what's not fake, and what is AI is good for or not good for if they are educated about AI and the consequences of AI. And I actually I'm one of the board members of the Hungarian AI coalition, and we are planning to do countrywide education program, not just for the kids, but also for adults and small businessmen who don't always have the same resources like the large companies you mentioned already.
Yeah, so you are going with critical thinking against deepfakes. The solution is not always technological or purely technological.
Let me just briefly agree with Laszlo that there are positive uses of deepfakes, even if it does render some people unemployed. If I can put deepfakes into a TV commercial, then I don't have to pay actors. And these will be people that have never existed, but they look like people, convincingly like people, and they'll deliver lines that I need. And it's much cheaper for me to make that commercial. You're convinced that they're authentic people. And so I think there are occasions where you could do this to save money. Otherwise, again, actors don't want to hear that. But it's as both Stuart and Grigory have noted, in the hands of nefarious leaders or people who want to overthrow movements, I fear how far that could go, because we're all so gullible and susceptible. You can have somebody who you know everything they've ever said, and all of a sudden a deep fake comes out and they're saying something different. And you say, so that's what they really believe, completely overriding all the rest of the information you have gathered on that person, right? That's how vulnerable we are to this kind of infusion in what is the world of truth and not truth. And we know that's been tested in the recent years.
Yeah, I think it's really impossible to unsee what you've seen. So even if someone tells you 2 days later, oh, that video you saw of the president doing this, that, and the other, or saying this, that, and the other, that was a fake, well, it's too late, right? It's imprinted in your mind and your consciousness that the guy is a liar or a philanderer or whatever it might be, and you can't undo it. But coming back to the idea of how we regulate driving, right? We have license plates on cars, and every driver carries a driving license that identifies them uniquely and so on. And this is global, and we just agreed, every country pretty much said, yeah, we need this, it's a great idea, let's do it. And we just haven't gotten around to the same level of thinking in the digital world. We've just let it be the Wild West on the assumption that, well, it's just digital, so nothing bad can happen. But
I think about this all the time. You can drive a car in any country in the world, and the street signs are, if not identical, similar to what you were trained on. What a triumph of all humans agreeing that red means stop, green means go. It's a beautiful fact.
And same with the telephone system, right? I can make a call from any country to any other country except for North Korea, and it all is seamlessly interoperating, right? So we can achieve this level of agreement and cooperation and protection, and I think it's really up to our governments to protect their people, and at the moment they are totally failing to do that.
Indeed.
Another way of answering this question is that it's very well demonstrated that if I give you, any of you, 2 pictures and say, which one would you choose to become your president or your coach or whatever, one of them will be fused a little bit with your eyes, with your signatures. It's guaranteed, 70, 80% guaranteed that you will choose the guy who looks like you. Now, if in this fake news, the programs, who are, you take your iPhone and anywhere, and then the AI person comes up and it's manipulated that it will be a little bit of your image.
Yeah.
It's guaranteed that you will vote with him.
Let's not give more advice to nefarious political players. now that some of the fight is over. So next question, actually, advantage to those who read the book The City and the Stars by Arthur C. Clarke. How many of you have read that book? Okay, Stuart, you're going to lead. So the question is, how can we keep the control when the ways of working of AI will be far beyond our understanding, like in the utopia of Arthur C. Clarke, City and the Stars?
So I would say if you don't understand how your AI is working, you're going to have a very hard time. So I actually think that deep learning, which, as we've already talked about, is essentially a big black box. That's one of the reasons why I think we actually need different technological approaches to building AI systems. And it turns out that because we don't understand how these black boxes work, they are vulnerable in all kinds of ways. So we mentioned earlier that you can use them for dermatology. I think Georgi mentioned that they're very good at recognizing, distinguishing between cancerous and non-cancerous marks on the skin. But it turns out that that system, if you rotate the photograph by 45 degrees or so, the system will change its mind 100% about whether or not this is cancer. Right? And we don't understand how it came to the decision in the first place, and we don't understand why it stopped working just because we rotated the photograph by 45 degrees. So I'm actually arguing that we need to build AI systems according to well-understood mathematical principles that we can mathematically prove will remain under our control and will be beneficial to human beings. And that is... that just seems like to do anything else will be completely irresponsible.
By the way, most things that we encounter in life are black boxes to us, even very old technologies. Most people who drive their car don't know how engines work or why there's an engine at all. And so most people who use their iPhones don't know how it works. They don't know that somewhere in there are GPS satellites giving timing signals to cell phone towers that are corrected by general relativity. Most people do not know that and don't care.
But the designers do know that.
The designers know. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And the problem with black box machine learning is the designers don't know.
They don't even know. Fine.
They have no idea what's going on.
There is no designer in the sense that there is not a single person who knows how to build a computer. There is no single person who can build an iPhone. This is a societal product of many, many brains cooperating together. This was my point about that humans as a society are very, very different from a single machine that we create.
So we only have one question's time, and it comes from an imposter, as it looks, because the user who sent in the question is called Hal9000. So if you have seen that name before. So the question is...
Don't kill us. Please don't kill us.
Yeah, please don't kill us, Hal. So the question and the short answers, please, from all panelists. Will we dare to entrust our political and/or economic decisions to AI? And actually, I just wanted to cite a research paper from last year, and it was about 25% of Europeans who would entrust AI with a political decision. It was made by a Spanish university in 2019, yeah. So what do you think about that? Economic or political decisions or high-level recommendations that can actually become policy very, very easily?
Well, I think that's a great question, and it points to the infiltration of AI further and further up the food chain. And we're already entrusting the vast majority of day-to-day economic decisions are made by machines. So the vast majority of decisions to buy and sell assets in the world are made by machines every day. And I think it's probably only a matter of time before it becomes a legal obligation on CEOs to listen to the recommendations of the AI system that they have to help them make decisions, because otherwise they're going to be losing money and the shareholders are going to be upset. Political decisions, I think, are much more complicated, and this, let's just leave it at that. I think it's much further off for high-level political decisions to be left to machines, but it's also hard to see how they could do a worse job.
You can go back to the definition of IQ, which I made, that there is a metric, there was a metric that was made for a purpose, to select soldiers for World War I. So now, if we can have that metric, then it can be as good as many things. So Daniel Kahneman has many examples, and one of them is showing that a 5-line program is much better predicting the price of Bordeaux wine next year than a committee of many wise people. Or in the Israeli army, selecting soldiers with an IQ program is much more reliable than 10 generals together. So yes, we can trust them as long as we know what are the metrics of the program that were created.
Yeah, I would say it's not so much a matter of trust. It's a matter of, if I'm in a position of power, generally whoever is voted, typically into power, does not have all the expertise necessary to wield that power. So in most of our more enlightened systems, there's some kind of set of ministers or the cabinet who advise the leader. And so I have no problem or hesitation if one of those advisors is the AI box. Right? And you bring the challenge to the AI box. Here's what my advisors say. What do you say, AI? AI comes in. Now I get to evaluate whether I will actually follow that advice, but I'll be folding in my prevailing morality, my ethics. These are the things that we know AI is not quite there yet. It might make a utilitarian decision that is not in the interest of the human spirit or what we know is the love we have for life. And so I see AI as a tool. And the day you replace your decision making with AI, you you're done. It's Skynet. It won't need us.
Okay.
I'll just be in the Bahamas.
Can we go with you, Neil? I've just been informed that we have 256 questions remaining, but of course we are not going to reply to all of them. But we can go a little bit over. So last...
That's an even power of 2, by the way. Was it 2 to the 9th power? Something like that?
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
256 questions. It's very binary of you. Yes.
So the last question is about...
to the 8th power.
Yes. Preparing for an AI world, and probably a transhumanist person is asking, can we compete or cooperate with AI with brain implants like the Neuralink device? And I remember from our previous conversation with Yuri that you have pretty strong opinions on Neuralink. So why don't you start?
Well, AI is a double-sword weapon, right? And industry is something like that. So my comment last time was the same as now, is that I have a great respect to industry because they do things that academia cannot, which is organize. What distinguishes academia, discovery science from implementation science, is that the goals are different. My job is to discover, but big projects such as the Manhattan Project, they can be implemented with enormous level of organization. The big projects usually picked right by people who are in charge, and they succeed because there is nothing to invent. There was nothing to invent in the Manhattan Project. There is nothing to invent in the Apollo Project. And there is nothing to invent now in the Neuralink, what we have seen so far. They have put three fantastic things together that are scattered in academia, and in a year or two with big money and organizational skill, they delivered something that we couldn't be able to deliver in 15, 20 years.
Well, just have to clarify something you said. When you're using invent from the point of view of the pure scientist, whereas the engineer is inventing things all the time, solutions to a challenge. So you mean there's no new science to be invented for those products to happen? And I agree entirely. We went to Apollo on very well-established science and the Manhattan Project, but the engineers have no end of patents making that stuff work.
Absolutely. We are in full agreement. So this is what I think good business people like Elon Musk can exploit, and you say, what is that in the minds of academics that we can put together, streamline it, and have a product? And that's what they are doing. So we are very grateful because, first of all, it challenges NIH, it challenges us. At the same time, we need some control, because what he says about the possibilities and so on, that's where the danger is a little bit, when you oversell something, when you oversell AI, when we oversell a robot, that's where we have to be responsible.
Unfortunately, I'm the saddest of you all, but we need to wrap up. And it's time for parting words. We hope that we have delivered on our mission and that you as the audience felt inspired and committed to continue your own exploration and your own preparation. Dear panelists, how do you all feel now? What would be your key takeaway for the audience? Is it time for au revoirs? Would you do it again? Neil, why don't you start?
I'd say bring it all on, and we'll figure it out. We try to figure it out in advance, or certainly as we go along. I think the benefits far outweigh the dangers. And on my deathbed, one of my regrets will be, gee, I'll miss what new advances AI could have brought us in the 10 years that follow. So I'm all in. Plus, at the end of the day, I can unplug it or shoot it because it doesn't have fingers. It doesn't. There's the ultimate human triumph over a machine, and that's pulling the plug from the wall. So that's where I am on that.
Other panelists, closing statements?
Well, the interesting point, of course, is that technology is always good for everybody. The problem is that when new technologies are present, then people who don't understand the technology are, even though if they have benefit from it, are scared. And the reason for that is that the profit is always disproportional. Some people take a lot and other people are taking less. Now, is this an important thing to say? Yes, I think it is very important, because there is a huge difference developing, a squeeze is developing between science and AI savvy citizens of big cities and the country people. And this scissor is increasing. And this is exactly the situation in Hungary, United States, England, and everywhere. And this is where the political landscape is decided. So AI and technology in general has this incredible responsibility. And as Laszlo said, we have to go and educate not only the young guys, but everybody.
because this kind of education about technology, not only the harmful, but the beneficial effects are super important. Otherwise, people will exploit it against us.
Thank you very much, Judy. Stuart, any last words? Famous last words?
Yeah, so, well, I think that the coming of general purpose intelligence would be the biggest event in human history. And we have to prepare for it. So that's the first point. The second point is that if we do a good job, it'll be the biggest positive event in human history. And the benefits are really unlimited. And we could have a golden age for humanity that I hope I'll still be alive to experience, like Neil. So thank you very much. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you very much, Stuart. And Lassie, your parting words?
Thank you. I really think AI in the current form is a great tool, and as a great tool can be used for good and bad things. But as I already mentioned, I want everybody to understand how this works and use it as for many things where they can improve their lives or work or whatever they want to do.
Thank you.
Can we do this again, like next year in Budapest? So
yes, Neil. Thank you. A little bird told me that
I'd never been to Budapest, and I mean, I can see it on the map, on the globe.
You would be most welcome here, Neil, and all panelists. Little bird told me that there's going to be a big continuation of this event next year. So let's hope that the
wonderful post-pandemic.
Absolutely, post-pandemic. Let's come together and spend some time together. So definitely it was the first, and hopefully not the last, for the super team to come together. We thank our gracious hosts, the MVM group, and they are hard at work already on taking this conversation to the next level on AI and many other futuristic topics in 2021. And you, the audience, thank you very much for your engagement. Stay engaged, keep on learning, keep on taking back our AI future. Thank you so much.
All right.